and we'll get to it later maybe, but not just now. And there could be solenoid valves, there could be displays, there could be network transmitters. Just like inputs can be over the network, outputs can also be over the network. So some examples of these things are, these um, swarms of networks that are being planned nowadays, right? So if you want to actually look at, for example, if you're looking at the traffic condition of some place, right, and you have an embedded system which is mounted on just at the traffic interconnection light, it is getting its inputs from a central command station, and then it is also giving its output, which is the visual representation of the traffic traffic condition right now. It is giving that input to the central command station. So both its inputs and outputs are essentially network inputs and outputs. Okay, so we have classified it, we have looked at what all are the hardware aspects of it. Now let's look a little bit about what are the software aspects of it. And the first thing that comes in mind is what exactly is going on inside the system. So essentially, I have put down 4 activities here, and what happens is it just simply goes on in a loop. So the system first gathers its inputs. Based on inputs, it will infer some conditions, right? Based on the conditions, it will deduce some responses. And once the responses are deduced, it will actuate some outputs and it'll go back to doing the same thing over and over again. So a central concept in embedded systems is this loop that goes on. Whether it is embedded systems, or if you come into the industry, you will find programmable logic controllers. All of them essentially are doing this. In fact, almost all computing systems, whether general purpose or special purpose, they go through this loop. So you might just say that this is just the most common thing about computing that you can sum up, right? So all computers do this, and especially embedded systems do it most of the times. That's their purpose in life, to go through all these 4 conditions again and again. So now that you know that we have these activity cycle is there, so what are the software architectures that you can use? So having said that it's a small system, having said that the RAM ROMs are small, another very another hallmark of an embedded system is that it is most of the times quite resource constrained. So there's a lot of constraints on the resources that it can use. It cannot use a lot of memory, it cannot use a lot of power, right? It also has to do all of these things within a given time span. So then software architectures become very, very important. It is not the amount of code that you write, it is how you put the code together that matters a lot. And so obviously multitasking is essential, because there are multiple things that the embedded system may be required to do. For example, while it is still gathering inputs, there might be a interrupt coming in from a hardware, special purpose hardware, which is saying you have to service my request right now. So now when this happens, this is a condition that the software architecture person has to look at and plan for. So essentially you have to include some kind of multitasking ability. As the system has evolved over a period of time, 2 major types of multitasking systems have come up. One is called the cooperative multitasking, and the other is the preemptive multitasking. So cooperative multitasking, we'll go and look at both of them a little bit more in detail. But in general, cooperative multitasking is essentially a big loop that is just doing A, B, C, D, E, F, and then goes back to A, B, C, D, E, F, and just keeps repeating that. Now, whether it does B after A or whether it does C after A, that's up to you. That's up to the software designer. Whether it does, it does it like a round robin scheduling type of thing, or it does based on some events. You could have a timing event which says that, this is the time when this task has to be done. So once this happens, I will do this task, and goes back to the super loop. Right? That is generally a cooperative multitasking system. You can have a state machine inside it, or you may not have a state machine inside it. A state machine generally allows you to very discreetly decide on what your system is going to do. A state machine approach is a lot of times it is quite good if you have multiple things that you have to do. For very small things where you are just going to do 4 or 5 things, 6 things, you may not go with the state machine approach, right? Then the second way of multitasking is preemptive multitasking. Now, what is preemptive multitasking? From the word as it says, you can preempt a task and you can give that time to some other task. In a cooperative multitasking case scenario, that doesn't really happen. And as we will see later, preemptive multitasking systems are essentially based on real-time operating systems. So real-time operating systems is a overall, overarching term. You can have cooperative multitasking using RTOSs, or you can have preemptive multitasking using RTOSs. So we'll go a little bit more on cooperative multitasking. Right. So what is a cooperative multitasking architecture? Essentially, you are scheduling tasks one by one, and the task scheduling is done in such a way that once the first task is finished, you go on to the second task. So there is no inherent idea of priority here. Like all tasks are the same priority. So you do A, B, C, D, E, F, go back to A, B, C, D, like that, right? And anything that is related to safety, which is a higher priority action, is generally done via hardware. So you have a hardware input that comes in when a certain major thing happens, and then you take care of that by writing a interrupt service routine for that hardware interrupt. That's how the most high priority safety inputs are handled. But as far as your regular tasks are concerned, there is no inherent task priority idea, right? And this approach, believe me, works in a lot of situations. Real-time systems with cooperative multitasking are surprisingly easy to maintain and perform. They are extremely good when you go for software architecture because it's very simple. So maintaining them, updating them is a lot of times easier than preemptive. And the big part is because it's just a loop, you don't necessarily need an RTOS. RTOSs are very sophisticated pieces of code which actually allow you some of the facilities that a general purpose operating system provides you. Like for example, I'm running this on a PC that is running Windows, right? Windows is a general purpose operating system. And it does a lot of things at the same time. You feel that there are a lot of applications running, but essentially you know that it is being time sliced. So the CPU is time sliced between all these applications. So when you write a cooperative multitasking system, you don't really need this because, well, you're going to do one by one all of them. And you can obviously have the most important one done first. But remember that the cycle time is going to be limited by the slowest task. Whichever is the slowest task, it will limit your overall time. And similarly, context switching will also be limited. How is it limited? Let me give you an example. So suppose there's a task that is looking at a certain serial input, and you have devised it in such a way that once you get an input of such and such kind, then you do other things, right? And so it goes there and waits for the system input. Now there might be some other tasks in the memory which are actually which are not dependent on outside network inputs right now, but because this task is waiting, you cannot do those, which means your entire thing is limited by your slowest task, which is generally a network input task. However, there are some RTOSs which allow cooperative multitasking by allowing it to yield to other tasks. Yield, when you say yield, means I am giving up control. So the task that is waiting for a network input will give up control. However, to give up control, you have to understand that if you're taking a task out of memory from the RAM into the ROM, you have to save its state because sometime it will come back. And when it comes back, it is expecting that it will come back to the same place where it left, which means whatever it was handling, whatever memory it was handling, you have to save that state. The minimum possible state has to be saved. So when you do that, your software, it doesn't remain any simple anymore. So you are slowly entering into the real-time operating system, area. And also because the context switching here is limited by the slowest task, you cannot really guarantee hard real-time deadlines. We'll come to the point where what is hard real-time and what is soft real-time, but suffice to say here that in such cooperative schemes, hard real-time requirements are not guaranteed. Let's go to preemptive multitasking now. So here, what you do is you create a priority of tasks. Right? Task priority is a very central idea in task preemptive multitasking. The whole idea, you're preempting a low priority task for a higher priority task whose time has come, right, or whose condition has been fulfilled. So tasks are scheduled here such that a higher priority task always gets to run before a lower priority task. The software architecture itself ensures that your higher priority task always gets the CPU time. In case if it's a lower priority task which is using the CPU and the higher priority task demands the CPU, then there has to be another piece of code which will save the state of the lower priority task in memory and then provide the CPU to the higher priority task. All of this is done generally by an operating system which is called the real-time operating system. There are cases and hazards in these architectures where there could be a priority inversion. It's quite common, and you have to somehow look at each system one by one and ensure that it doesn't happen like that way. Right? Okay, so because you have the ability to preempt, you can do some safety related actions in software also. That is a big advantage because now you can use software interrupts, and because these are software interrupts, there can be many of them instead of just 1 or 2 or 4 or 10 of hardware interrupts. And obviously, because you're doing it so complicated way, an RTOS is almost essential. Right? And the context switch time, when I say context switch, it is the context for the CPU. In what context the CPU is actually acting. So a context switch means that the CPU has changed its context from task 1 to task 2. When it goes from task 1 to task 2, now because the RTOS is handling this, it doesn't depend on the task itself. It depends on the RTOS and its own software architecture. And a lot of times RTOSs are very expensive because they guarantee you extremely fast context switching times. And you see, why are you doing all this? We are doing this because we want to meet hard real-time deadlines. So hard real-time deadlines, meeting them is the whole point of being preemptive. Hard real-time deadlines can be guaranteed in such systems. You can guarantee that this task will happen within this much time frame. Okay. So then, as a designer, which type of multitasking should we use? So the simple answer is it depends on the application. Now, you have to look at a few things. You have to look at the fact whether the application itself, does it mandate hard real-time deadlines? Now let's come down to real time. What is real time? So see, the CPU is actually working at a few megahertz, right? So a real time for it is in nanoseconds, right? And we are actually working on seconds and minutes and hours, right? So we have to find a middle ground somewhere. So somehow humans have found a middle ground that milliseconds is something that you can work with the CPU and you can also understand yourself. So generally real-time requirements are mentioned in terms of milliseconds, which is 1,000th of a second. So you have to understand and figure out whether the application actually mandates hard real-time system deadlines. Does it or does it not? Will the integrity of the system and its parts or the safety of the user who's using the system, will those be compromised if you miss an action by a few milliseconds? So then you'll have to figure that out based on the application, right? If yes, if you feel that is a yes, then an RTOS based multitasking system is essential. And if you don't know yet, then the best part is to simply implement it as a cooperative multitasking, test it out on different types of inputs, different types of conditions, and different types of operating and performance criteria, and then you decide on it. And suffice to say here that it is not an easy decision at all. It comes with experience. You have to understand what are the types of inputs that you're dealing with. Sometimes there are some physical inputs which are very slow, so there it doesn't make any sense going real time, right? For example, heating. Now generally heating outputs are much slower than, for example, a motor driver. And then a motor driver is quite slower as compared to an audio visual output. So you have to decide based on whether the application actually demands it or not. If you think that it doesn't demand, if you think you cannot figure out just as yet, it's best to implement it right now as a cooperative system, and then you test it out. Okay, so let's go over a design methodology experiment here. This is like a case study. I'm just taking up a contemporary system like a hand sanitizer dispenser system. You find them everywhere these days, and we have made it here in our premises, and it's doing pretty well. So let's say what are the problem statements? So the problem statement here is that you have to detect the presence of a sanitizer collector, right? Some kind of a collector, whether it's a human hand, or you decide to detect the presence of a material collector or things like that. And then once you detect the presence of a collector, you need to dispense the sanitizer, right? So now your design decisions are going to be based on these two problem statements. So how do you detect the presence of a collector? Some kind of sensor you will need, right? Okay, now, does this problem require millisecond accuracy? So the obvious answer is no, it doesn't require. Like if you detect the hand, in 100 milliseconds or 200 milliseconds or 300 milliseconds, it wouldn't make any difference to the user. The user would probably not even notice it, right? So then it's definitely not a hard real-time system. But it does require it is required that the system does respond within a few seconds, right? Because otherwise the person would just be waiting. So, so it falls somewhere in the cooperative multitasking sort of architecture. Right? Now, which platform to be used? So you have to figure out, here's where your technical part and the actual product development part sort of merges. Like you have to figure out whether the platform that you're using, is it affordable to you? Will you be able to price your product after you buy this platform and work on it? Will you be able to buy the product, price it in a way that is affordable for the user also? How easily is this platform available? If you use a very esoteric platform, right, which is not really available anywhere, you just found somewhere and it's good, but you're using that one, there are chances that you may not actually get it when you want to make it. And how easily programmable is it? What are the kind of software tools that you have available at your disposal, which you can use? Then there's some other design decisions which are based on features. So for example, does it need to differentiate between sanitizers and other liquids? So maybe yes, maybe not, because differentiating between a sanitizer and other liquid is a very gray area these days. Because see, if you just want to detect pure alcohol, that's possible. And if you want to detect a certain percentage of alcohol, that's possible. But you don't know how long the sanitizer has been sitting inside the dispenser. How much of alcohol is actually left. So you may not necessarily get the correct idea. So this responsibility is then left to the user. We assume that the user will put sanitizer. So what we are going to do is we are going to do a liquid dispenser essentially, right? Now, does it need to be powered by mains or batteries? Well, obviously it must be powered by mains, because you cannot have batteries all the time. Otherwise the user will have to keep charging the batteries. You can also, but it is good to have batteries, because if the user does not have a mains connection or the power has failed, your dispensing should not stop, right? So then you come down to the point, what kind of batteries would you like to have? Would you like to have rechargeable batteries? And then you make your system, available for the recharging, like you allow a charger to be also be incorporated. Is that too much stretched or what? So you have to take some decision here, right? And then when you dispense the liquid, how do you indicate to the user that the liquid is being dispensed? Obviously he will collect the sanitizer in his hands. He or she would collect the sanitizer. However, there has to be some output to the user from the system, which means it says that the system is actually doing what it is supposed to be doing, right? Why is this important? There are conditions when there is essentially no sanitizer left, right? And then a person is waiting for the liquid to be dispensed, nothing comes out. So at least the system should tell somehow to the user that the process of dispensing is finished now, right? So then the person can take further steps. Now, is it necessary to show the level of the sanitizer inside the system? Probably yes. Yes, but how do you show it? Do you show it electronically like a bar display, or do you just show it mechanically through a slit? If you give it a slit, you will have to also eliminate the sanitizer from inside. So there's a lot of decisions that go through this. And as I said, embedded systems design is the technical part is a separate part. However, it very closely connects to the product development and product design and management faculties. You will see that most of the times, the hardware and software co-design, testing and validation, tech support are also important, and in addition to the costing and pricing. So tech support, I would say, is very, very important. A lot of times good products don't sell because there's not good enough tech support for them. So after sales, you have to support the user somehow. So the more you think about it and the more you work on it, the higher chances that the product will actually be well received. And how would you rate such systems, right? You would rate systems on their effectiveness, right? Is it doing what it is supposed to do? Are there any side effects of the functions that it performs? Like, how effective is it within the required time frame? That is called efficiency. Being efficient means being effective within a certain time period. So efficiency has the concept of time associated with it. So whether it is doing its work in the given time, how much is the energy consumption of it? If the designer has a certain power budget, are you able to function everything within that power budget, right? That is an important part. Then, then cost. What is the cost? Or how affordable it is? If you have enough money, you can almost get anything today made. And that's a very true statement. But that if is a very big if. And the better you think about it early on, the better it is for the system. Right? Is it in the field? Well, once a system is bought, it is expected to function. You have to give some amount of warranty time within which the system will function. So what is the reliability? Reliability also connects to the actual design decision. You might find that a lot of systems have redundancies built into the system just to ensure that reliability is not compromised. And then there is this thing called as upgradability. So like you upgrade your software applications, right? Can you upgrade the software of your embedded system in the field? For example, if you have a health band which shows, say, 10 different parameters, and a new update comes in, what is the easiest way to update the software on the health band? Is it through the USB connection to the PC? Can it actually, because it's already Bluetooth, can it be done over the air through Bluetooth? So you have to also look at these while you are, looking at the performance of an embedded system. Okay. So we have almost come to the end of our presentation here, and now I'm just going to list down what kind of hardware skills I have found helpful while dealing in this system, right? So you have to understand some basic electrical engineering. You have to understand that Electrical engineering essentially contains only two quantities. It is the impressed voltage and the load resistance. These are the only two independent quantities in electrical engineering. Almost everything else is a derived quantity. So the sense of what is voltage, what is current, what is power, what is impedance, what is capacitance, inductance, these things you have to have clear. Then you also need some understanding of basic semiconductor devices. You have to understand what is a PN junction diode, what is a transistor, what kind of transistors are available to us. You have to understand what are the whether it's a current driven transistor like a bipolar transistor, or is it a voltage driven transistor like a MOSFET. You also have to sometimes understand a little bit of power switches like silicon control rectifiers, triacs, IGBTs, those types of things. Then because you're also dealing with the logic, you have to understand digital electronics gates. So you need to understand what is a flip-flop, what are registers, what are microcontrollers and processors, some communication standards such as RS-232. These things will come up again and again and again. Like when you talk to embedded engineers and you talk to them about their designs, you will see that these words are coming in again and again. You have to understand what are timing diagrams. From an analog electronics perspective, you have to understand what are the different basic op-amp circuits, operational amplifier circuits. You have to know a little bit about what are the filters that we generally use. A lot of times these embedded systems implement filters, data filters in software. But if you can implement them in hardware, I have found that they are much efficient and your software becomes simpler, right? Then you have to understand power supply architectures. As far as some higher, like I think this ties into a slightly higher level engineering, but you have to understand what is a linear feedback control system. And what are these feedback control systems which we talk of often? Probably about 70 to 80% of control systems are linear feedback control systems. Okay. And then the mechanisms that are used, such as on-off control or fuzzy control or PIDs, proportional integral differential control, you have to know some amount of this theory. As far as industrial work is done, you have to also understand what are relays, contactors, switches of different types. And then because you're dealing with systems, you would also you would be expected to know a little bit about temperature, pressure, flow, humidity, like I said, irradiance or brightness, color temperatures. You will see on LEDs sometimes you will find there is a certain color temperature mentioned, 6500K. What is 6500K? Why is it written? So it is good to know that. And all of that will come handy when you work on embedded systems. You also have to understand how printed circuit boards are developed, right? You may not know how to develop them, but you have to understand the general theory behind, what is the printed circuit board, how it comes into fruition. And as I said, you will need loads of curiosity in all fields. Now let's come down to software skills that will be required. Obviously, you're working in software, you would need understanding of binary number systems, like bitwise math systems and conversion to hexadecimals and decimals and things like that. It would also be good to know general purpose microcontroller organization. Like I said, like we saw in one of the earlier slides, how a microcontroller is actually organized inside. Then you would be regularly dealing with C, C++ compilers. What is it, debugging them, whether you may not necessarily have the facility to debug your own thing, like using the classical debugging approach that we use on PCs. So, as I said, embedded systems are resource constrained systems, and designers generally find ways to deal with those constraints. You also have to understand some software lifecycle concepts such as unit testing, integration, version control, continuous integration, continuous development, those kinds of things. And obviously you would have to have loads of curiosity. So that's a given everywhere. Okay, so this is the last slide. What I have here is a sort of classification based on what are the general prospects for jobs. So if you're a hardware engineer, embedded hardware engineer, you will do the activities such as you will develop, implement and test and maintain hardware systems used in the product. You will also typically do PCB design and development. And you would also be required to provide some support to customers, your customers, which means they may be within your company, but you will be required to support them based on hardware settings and failure points, troubleshootings, those kinds of things. If you are an embedded software engineer, most of the times you would develop software, you will maintain software, you will implement them, test them, integrate them with other software pieces of code. And a lot of software that you write will be in direct contact with hardware. So you'll write a lot of device drivers. You may be required to write algorithms for performing the actions that the embedded system is supposed to do. And you would also have to have ability to interface with the PCs, because as I said earlier, embedded systems may not necessarily have a general purpose computing interface, but somehow you have to give the user the ability to configure them. So a lot of times it is over a regular USB connection, so that ability has to be there. And sometimes embedded systems are used to collect data from the field, and this data needs to be fed to a different supervisory control system where some kind of post processing is done. So you may also be doing those kinds of work.